Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Project Flux. I'm here with my co-host Yoshi. How are you today, Yoshi?
Amazing, mate. Always good.
Always good. That's what I like to hear, and it is positive because there's so much good stuff going on. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Nermeen Latif from WSP. We had a really good conversation with her about her role at WSP and how she sees data analytics impacting project delivery and PMOs. And then we talked about some fabulous stories. What was your highlight?
Well, the biggest out there news was this an AI candidate running for UK Parliament. I think that's a very unique use case of AI, but also the Pope addressing concerns for AI at the G7 summit. I think he offered his moral standpoint, and I think we start to see more commitment coming from more political leaders.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, we'll turn our attention straight to the conversation with Nermeen. But before we do, just a reminder to, if you like this podcast, please make sure you subscribe and follow. Please make sure you share with your friends. If you can, please leave a review because it really helps the algorithm. And then don't forget about the newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter, and every Monday you'll get a digest of all the things that have happened in the world of AI in the week. Without further ado, we'll go straight on to the conversation with Nermeen Latif from WSP. Hello, everyone, and welcome, Nermeen. It's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you.
Nermeen is the digital team lead PMO at WSP and also my colleague on the Project Data Analytics Task Force. So I've been very, very excited to get you on the podcast since we started it. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yep, me too.
So like we normally do, we're going to just cover a few questions about you, and then we're going to get into some of the big stories from the week. And of course, there's been, as every week seems to be, a lot of big stories in the AI and data analytics world. And I guess the big one is all around the Apple Intelligence announcement. So we're going to cover that in quite a lot of detail. But before we get into that, Nermeen, I mean, you're very experienced in your field and you've had experience of setting up PMOs and project controls. But one thing that I think would be really good to bring it home to the listeners is, can you share a memorable challenge that you might have faced while setting up a PMO and how data analytics helped that, or could have helped that, I guess?
I suppose if I focus on some recent projects, it's really around systemizing what we do, and where we've been able to. So I've worked with teams. We've had a good data model, and we've understood what we're trying to record, and simplified some of the processes to save time. And it's actually been really easy then to go and pick that up and lift it and kind of put it onto another project and even another client. And so it kind of goes back to what's that kind of common information that happens and report, we report on in every project. So, you always have a schedule, there's certain fields in the schedule, cost, there's always certain things in reports that clients want to see. And having that simple view that can be applied anywhere, that's been really helpful. In terms of a data analytics piece, it's then kind of putting a very easy dashboard on the front of that, and then looking at how we can present that information back to the teams and how we can get that information updated as regularly as possible, because a lot of the time it's about old information, or we're working with suppliers and everything gets out of date. So if we can make it simple and easy and kind of not trip up people contractually, that's where I found it to be quite effective. And I think more and more people are coming onto this. I do think as an industry we could share, and we could say this is a common template that anyone can use, and then it's not specific to company A or company B. The whole industry benefits, and it's just a method of working, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's that open source piece, isn't it, that we talk about a lot. We're all trying to solve the same problem, and there's little value in us all trying to solve the same relatively straightforward problem, if you like, and we should be putting our energy towards the bigger problems. But I think it's interesting what you said about this repeatability. You can lift and shift effectively from one project to the other, because I know a lot of people's starting point is, well, data analytics doesn't apply to us because every project is unique. And I do a big presentation on this. But that's a real myth, isn't it? Do you think that every project is unique? Yes, the end product is, but the processes that we go through are very similar, right?
I think so. I mean, and that's exactly in project management. We're trying to standardize the way that we deliver projects. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if you've read How Big Things Get Done, Bent
Oh, the
Fluvier,
Ben
and
Frubier one,
yeah, and
the
it's
Lego
basically
bits.
saying exactly that we need to be standardizing and keeping things simple, because it's something crazy like 99.5% of projects are not delivered on time, to cost, and don't deliver the benefits. So that's quite a shocking statistic.
Mhm.
We should be trying to make things as simple as possible and repeatable. I know that project can be complex. You can have, big mega giga projects. But in terms of information and how we kind of describe those types of things we're trying to build, we should be able to come up with a kind of, almost like a BIM, like a simple way of describing the data that anybody can apply that kind of taxonomy to any type of project and scale it up and down.
And the fact that it's repeatable doesn't, or simple in the kind of data way, doesn't mean that the actual output project is simple. I've seen some incredible examples of very innovative design, which is still being built by those principles. And actually, talking about Bent's book, he talks about the Empire State Building, doesn't he, as a good example of something that gets done incredibly well, incredibly quickly, and to budget. And this goes back, nearly 100 years, right? So it's in some senses, it's nothing new, right? We're talking about just doing common sense, sensible approaches to major projects.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I find a lot, especially in project controls, there's a lot of handle turning every month for very quick timescales. And all we really want to do is make that as automated, make everything as automated as possible and as real time as possible, so that we're not doing that handle turning and we're figuring out, what is the information telling us? Can we predict what might happen? What can we actually do? Can we actually focus on the major issues in the project, rather than just kind of making a process work?
Yeah.
Nermeen, you also you mentioned something around it is key to be able to implement today. To enable a project, you need to be able to set up the right frameworks and the right standards, and you do that without trying to trip up supply chain, like contractually. So would you say contracts are a big challenge when you're navigating the implementation of data within projects?
Yeah, I think it's about having that that common language, people talk about data dictionaries or coding structure. So if there was a common language across the industry, a bit like, the BIM standard, that's always available. Everybody's working to it. It's kind of platform agnostic. A lot of time stuff is around integrating this system or that system. But could we be in a situation where we can say, right, well, we've got that's the information we've got, and regardless of the platforms, we can pull it together?
Yeah, because I mean, it's the age-old thing, isn't it? The industry is unfortunately still so fragmented. We get these teams come together. You've got the engineers, your architects, your builders, your surveyors, that basically then dissipate at the end of the project, and you start all over again. And each of those disciplines have different codes. And it's something that I've noticed is that can't be that difficult to try and make sure there's some commonality. And the other thing I noticed, it's different in different parts of the world as well. So, for instance, the US will do things differently to the UK. So it makes it really difficult to get that commonality. But that's entirely self-imposed by our industry. It's not as if it's something we can't change.
Exactly.
So
I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of good ideas about how we could bring this together. I've worked recently on some sustainability projects, and I've seen the implementation of the PAS 2080 coding system, so that everybody can bring together their data on sustainability and reporting and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the industry just sucked that up and got on with it, really. So, it's very much similar type of thing.
Well, I think we're going to be forced into more collaboration because of a lot of the third parties, because a lot of the third party tools, and I'm sure you guys use Autodesk, for instance, that is going to force people into a certain way of working. But the danger with that, I guess, is the more information we provide to those third parties, the more that they can start providing services on their own. using the data that they're basically harvesting from us. So I think that's a big danger that I'm worried about. Is that something that concerns you as well?
On which Autodesk?
Well, just the third-party providers sucking up a lot of the information and then, effectively providing models back to clients instead of the consultants.
I mean, that is the way that some of these tools are going at the moment. So, I mean, I've got some vendors speaking to me about some prediction tools, for risk and scheduling. So I asked the question, well, where does the information come from? And it is trained on a data set. I don't know which data set, but I'm guessing it must be client data. But then also when you buy the software, you're kind of reassured that your data will be protected. So I don't know. I mean, it comes back to that data sharing. Should we be just sharing some data? I mean, maybe taking off some pricing information if we're consultants, but should there be some stuff that we should be sharing? How long does it take to deliver certain types of work, etc.? Because I don't think we can hold on to our own data.
No, and I think we just got to be a bit wiser to the fact that, these third-party providers, they sell us these tools at what seems to be very reasonable rates, but the reality is they're building a business and they are building models based on that data. It's just being conscious of it. But
it's also interesting, James, that you mentioned that, because a lot of these leading AI companies are spending billions on image data and video data. So they're paying some of these suppliers who are experts within that arena to give them data. I mean, we're talking billions here. But then when it comes to enterprise organizations, try to start getting these things. Yeah. But then when they're coming to industries such as construction, we're actually paying them to use their software, of which they're then swallowing the data and feeding their own models. So the way that we look at it is almost opposite to some extent. But until we start to see the value of the data that we actually have, and I think that's where people have forgotten the value of data that we actually have currently, is where the leverage that we have as consultants.
Well, that's where going to our next question. I mean, it's about what I think the Project Data Analytics Task Force and the Project Data Analytics Coalition is so valuable, what it's doing, and the manifesto that I know you're a part of. Do you just want to talk about that for a bit? Because I think that does talk about making sure that we're sharing the data between ourselves, right?
Yeah. So I mean, so we were both at the Association for Project Management conference a couple of weeks ago, and so kind of talking through the data-driven manifesto with a lot of the delegates, and so these six pledges, we were voicing how we want to give examples back to the industry of how we're implementing those in our organizations. And that's really what the question came back from everyone. Please, can you show us how? We're really confused. There's so much information out there. I mean, and it's really, people want to know how can they kind of filter what's useful from everything that's out there. There's almost like, several tools coming out every week, and what can they do to make their job more effective? So I think that's some of the question. And it's not just about data. It's probably about, well, what is difficult in project delivery? What do you find difficult in your job? What slows you down? What would you like to, what problems do you face in your job? And I think that's probably one area where organizations should focus. And then that will give them where they need to find a solution in data analytics. And I think that's probably it, rather than going, oh, there's loads of things. Could this GPT be good for me, or this one? And so that's one thing I heard. In terms of data sharing, there's lots of barriers, but the great thing is there's the IPA. So if they will share their data, that would possibly lead the way. So I don't know that the level of sharing. I haven't looked at it, but if they're sharing and they're experimenting and they're doing, and the IPA government is a lot of our clients. So if our clients are there, we'll be, most consultants will be following suit. So that's great.
And that's why I think the coalition that's just been launched off the back of the task force is so important, because now we've got a bunch of very major clients in the UK actually doing the doing. So the task force has, in some sense, done its job of raising awareness from when it started. And the awareness is there now. I think it's fair to say that, this subject has been talked about an awful lot, but now it's about the doing, because as you say, people are confused. Well, where do I start? And I mean, what I say to people is baby steps. You're not going to, change everything overnight. And we're not going to get to the point of having a huge construction data trust overnight. But if you can get your organization, or even your part of your organization, in order, that's a start, right? And you just do it, and you'll be surprised how much can get done. I mean, if I take our own example, we had to start from scratch with a cost database where I was working, and it felt like a real kind of uphill struggle. But a year on, all of a sudden you look back and you go, okay, now we've got a structured database for cost, and then things start snowballing. Because once you've got that kind of data structure in place and people can see that it works, all of a sudden it happens quite quickly. So I'm confident that if we all sort of band together, that things will change quite quickly. But what are the other main outcomes of the manifesto, if you like, or the main points of the manifesto?
So, we talked around, there's kind of saying sometimes that data doesn't lie, sometimes it does, depending on how you use it. But really, one of the things was some of those myths. We talk about the myths and, the various things happening on our project because of this. Well, actually, if we have the information there, then we can say, well, that's what the data's telling us, and maybe kind of counteract some of the human biases or power biases in projects, because that's also another area I'm quite passionate about, where how do we make decisions? Are we making decisions based on feeling and what somebody else higher up the chain wants, or are we doing it based on really sound rationale? So that's another key piece. We've spoken about projects being data enabled. So can we have a kind of common way? Is there a common data strategy we could issue through our professional institutions, saying this is how we approach data? These are some standard things. Maybe we could come up with something like a PAS model for how we describe data. And then we've spoken about pooling. What is it, even as consultants, what could we share without kind of compromising individual consultants' information? But we could share something around rail projects or nuclear projects or something like that to help those projects be delivered better. So what could we share? And then also, so we've spoken around skills. So I'm not saying everybody has to be a programmer, but just for everyone to get a bit more on the literacy curve. I think you mentioned it earlier, but we need to be able to understand what our vendors are trying to sell us. We need to be able to understand how to structure companies, what's the future, what are the skills. As you say, projects are delivered by people. So let's kind of appreciate the value of the human bit, and then what can we use the data analytics to enhance us with? And that then helps us get to a kind of culture where we're not afraid and we're just going to kind of see how we can get better. And we'll not have 99.5% of projects being delivered late over cost. And
that would be
benefits.
Nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think you raise a really important point about bias as well, because the data, the old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out, but bias is a really important point as well, because it's not the only thing either. It's because if you've got an existing bias, and I'm reading a book at the moment, which I think you might have read, Yoshi, called Noise, that talks about how if you've got a pre-existing bias, sometimes the data will just you'll make the data confirm that existing bias. So there's still a human element to all this. Yes, you can be data driven and you can use data analytics, AI, dashboards, etc. But that professional judgment, I think, is still really, really important.
I have a question for both of you, which might be a bit controversial.
Go on. We like controversy.
And the controversial question is the advancement recently with AI and generative AI and many forms of it have spawned from private companies, right? Not public sector companies. So OpenAI, and Microsoft, Google, and these likes. So if these companies are the ones who are driving a lot of the advancements within AI, why is it we look to government to regulate the impact of AI when they should typically be playing catch up to where some of these private companies are?
Nermeen, do you want to go? That's a big one. Do you want to go first? Or?
I think, is it something around, ethics, isn't it? And responsible use of these of these systems. So I think that's probably where the government needs to kind of get involved at a policy level, even though, or they have to play catch up really. So probably have to. I'm sure they've got experts on their panels helping with the decision making. But I guess that's where the industry needs to come together and say, if you want to advance, if you don't want to be blocked by a government policy, you need to kind of open up and say exactly what is the aim of this system and what could be some unintended consequences of some of the systems.
Yeah, I agree. I think government, naturally catch up. They have to react to what the public sector's doing, and it's a question of. And we had the same with the internet, right? It took a while to get the regulations in place, and it's no different now. But I think there's from the industry, I think it's actually what we got to talk about is the institutions, because we're all governed by our relevant institutions, whether that's APM, whether that's REBA, whether that's RICS in America, or be PMI, etc. There's these industry, and I think they hold a lot of weight because they're the ones who will decide whether someone's a chartered professional or a qualified professional, and it's in their gift to say no, we're not. You're not allowed to use that model, or actually there's a limit to what you can and can't do with these models. So whilst the government, has a role to play, it's always going to be playing catch up, Yoshi, because it's going to react. Whereas the institutions, and I'm pleased to see, what APM are doing, and I'm working with the RICS at the moment, they are reacting, they are doing something. But again, it will always be some kind of a reaction. I guess the key is how quickly can they react and get some kind of fence into the industry at the moment, because we're at that kind of Wild West point, aren't we, with AI at the moment, where people are like, I'm not sure how this impacts me. I'm not sure what it means. I'm not sure what I should or shouldn't do. The gap between that happening, that Wild West phase, and having some order come to it, you need to minimize as much as possible. And that's what I want the institutions to do. Right. Shall we move on to some of the stories then? So again, I'm waiting for 1 week, Yoshi, we're going to say there's no news. That hasn't happened yet in the 12 weeks we've been doing this podcast. And
the news is getting wilder and wilder.
It is getting wilder and wilder. But there was a big announcement. Do you want to talk about the big announcement from last week, which was the Apple announcement?
Yeah, so the big announcement from last week was the announcement of Apple Intelligence by, as it is in the tin, by Apple at their WWDC conference. And the main focus was the integration of AI into a lot of their native software, so within your iPhones. So big picture, this is looking at a big change in terms of how we start to adopt AI, because it's within all of our phones, and iPhones are the massive market share, right, within mobile devices. But the big thing that came out was that Apple haven't developed their own generative AI, and they've actually partnered with OpenAI to use a lot of their capability within their devices. Now, to the public, this caused a lot of concern because Apple are known for having or keeping quite close to user security, user privacy, right? So they that's one of their big selling points. But OpenAI, on the other hand, have been scrutinized in the past, and a lot of other leading AI companies have been questioned around what they're doing with data and user privacy, data security, etc., etc. So my question for you guys is how do you think Apple's emphasis on privacy will influence their consumer trust in comparison to competitors like Google and Microsoft?
Do you want me to go first? I think this is a bigger announcement than first appears in terms of, it's just another Apple announcement. I think what Apple do really, really well is they kind of sit back, they watch what the competitors are doing, and then they come up with a solution that speaks to the most important issue to your average consumer. So with AI, what we've seen is a lot of concern around security, around, what does AI actually mean for me? Concerns around hallucinations, all the stuff that you read about, the kind of problems with large language models. And they've dealt with it. And they've basically got the tagline of, this is AI for you. This is personalized AI for you. And their marketing machine is amazing, but actually, if you dig a bit deeper and read into the story, it does hold up to scrutiny as well, because what they're saying is most of the processing is going to be done on device. It's called private cloud compute. Most of the kind of queries that you raise will be done just on your iPhone. So it's not going out there into the big wide world, and you're not getting rid of security. Where it needs to do something a bit more hefty, it then partners with OpenAI and goes out to the cloud, effectively, to the OpenAI cloud. Mm-hmm. But what they've done is they've created a separate kind of section. So it is still a secure part of the OpenAI model. So it's not training the model, your data's not getting out. So what they've done is they've addressed the security issues, and then the marketing machine has made it sound as if Apple have got your back. Don't worry about all this AI stuff. If you use Apple device, you can use it safely. And like they do with most of their stuff, it's just really secure. And I know there's going to be some Apple non-fans out there who say, it's all marketing, and it probably is a little bit about it, but the message strikes home really, really well. And I think this is going to be one of the big shifts that happens, where people just start using these generative large language models without even realizing it, because it's just going to be baked in to their everyday devices. And I think Google and the others need to take an awful lot of note from Apple about the way that they go about these product launches, because a lot of the Google ones have been pretty awful and have just raised public concern more than kind of got rid of any fear, whereas Apple have got it the other way around. So that's my take on it. I don't know about you, do you use any Apple devices, Nermeen, or you're an Android person?
I'm an Android person, but what I would say...
That's interesting then.
Well, what I would say though is it'd be good to know what exactly the AI elements would be doing. So how are they helping? Would they feel intrusive? Would you feel criticized by the AI? Is it going to say, why are you eating that? Your health plan's not going to work out if you do that. So I would just be curious to know what is it actually going to mean in practice. And then the other thing, it's just like, for example, celebrities or, I don't know, MPs, would they be comfortable? Because how sure could you be that somebody's not going to kind of cyber criminal get into the OpenAI protected area? Like people's phones have been hacked into. It's very valuable and material if you're famous to go and steal some data, isn't it?
It is, and I'm sure.
There's a few things that I find interesting here. I think, you're right. In terms of, so people don't think that Apple have used AI within a lot of their products before. And we know that they have, if you're kind of savvy with technology to a certain extent. Because you see in the biofeedback you get on your wristwatches, right? They just don't mention the word AI prior to this announcement of generative AI, because they appeal to the benefits of the customer. So as opposed to saying, okay, your watch is AI powered, you'll just see the information which helps you effectively live better, right? So you get the information, the informatics, and then you can take decisions on that. What I really like about the way that Apple have approached this is, like you mentioned, James, is that they've sat and they've waited and they've developed a partnership which will supercharge the adoption of Apple products. Taking on Nermeen's point about if you're a politician, for instance, and you're worried about your data being used because it's on your phone, two things that I've seen being thrown about. I don't know where it's come from. I saw it initially from the YouTube view with the OpenAI CTO. And it was that with what Apple are doing, it is the most advanced security architecture ever deployed for cloud AI compute at scale. So that's one level of comfort. But OpenAI CTO also mentioned that they will not be logging any information via Apple accounts. So there is a strict level of maintaining user privacy. I don't think they're giving too much information in terms of what it looks like, but independent researchers have gone and started to verify a lot of what they're doing. It does seem to be at the cutting edge of cloud computing to this extent. So there is some comfort in knowing that information, but we'll have to wait and see what actually happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. We'll wait until the first hack, as Nermeen said, and then maybe we'll reassess our position. But I think it's inevitable that this is going to, because so many people use the devices and so many companies have it as their, standard device. This is going to start being used for project work, because it will just be in your hand the same way that we use Google or Google Maps now. I think people will just automatically start using some of these generative features built into Apple for things like scheduling or predictions and et cetera within the project environment. I think it's going to open up the conversation a lot more for your kind of maybe people who are less AI savvy, because it will just be baked into what they use day to day, right?
The barrier to entry is so much lower.
It's the barrier to entry, exactly. But you raised an important point. I just want to carry on another story, which was a bit of a funny one, but also quite serious, I think. Nermeen, you talked about politicians and what have you using AI. There was a story that I read in the UK. There's general election coming up in the next few weeks, and don't we know it? It's all on the news at the moment. But there was actually a candidate who's running as an AI candidate. Now, the headline, and you can read this in the newsletter, of course, it's slightly misleading. There is a real candidate, and he's basically created an AI representative to ask questions. But I thought it was quite interesting that, someone is using artificial intelligence as a way of differentiating themselves as a candidate in a general election. I mean, what did you guys make of that story?
Scott, I just heard about it from you, but just thinking about it, I was like, maybe they'll probably be a bit more robust than most candidates because they can fact check, they can predict,
Yeah.
they can probably tell you how the budget and everything's going to be working out for the country and the economic outlook. So, yeah, advantages.
Maybe they won't get their own manifesto wrong as well, as we've heard other MPs do in the past. I think it will at least be consistent, unless it hallucinates, of course, like some of these models do.
Yeah, I think it's quite cool to know the context of some of this as well. So the AI, it's called AI Steve, and it's created by a guy called Steve Endicott. So he's a self-described capitalist with a socialist conscience, and he created this AI candidate out of frustration with traditional politics. And I think it was the idea that there's not a lot of engagement between politicians and also what the public want. There's a big discrepancy between the two of them. So the idea is, how do you convey information to the user and engage with people while trying to your policy is a lot more clearer and in the narrative that they understand as well. So I think that's where it came from. But it's worth noting that he unsuccessfully ran for local office as a Conservative, receiving only a few votes before. So he's been in this place before and he understands it. But I think that the biggest benefit from this is that people can get information 24/7, right? They can get access to information and they can start to really scrutinize and pick on specific topics to the AI. And I think within this AI model, I think it mentions that if there are certain topics which the AI doesn't know, it will do some independent research and then provide some prompts or context back to the voter or the user, and they can then suggest policies. And the way that he's run the AI is, if he was to come into power of some sort, it would be a democracy. So depending on who is voted for him, they can then, it will take the most popular response as what he would take for in office. So I think there's a lot of interesting way. I think it changes the way that we interact.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Tao, that sort of decentralized organizational way of going into democracy. And I can definitely see more of that happening. But I think from a project perspective, the reason why I wanted to raise it on this show is, if this is happening for politicians, then it's not going to be long, is it, until we've got AI agents on projects doing something similar to AI Steve, but whether it's an AI project manager or an AI QS. You can see the direction of travel. Yes, it's a little bit gimmicky, and I'm sure he's using it to his advantage. But what it does is it creates this that this isn't abnormal. This is not abnormal now, And the more and more this happens, it will become relatively. I think by the time we get to the next general election, right? Is it 5 years? The term 5 years time. I could see this being quite common in some sense, like certainly on the project way that we run projects, having these AI agents helping to run projects.
Well, question for you both then. So in this instance, if the AI was to hallucinate and give misinformation, who takes responsibility? And then again, if that's within a project delivery context, if the AI hallucinates, who takes responsibility if there's going to be some form of bad consequence?
Well, my view is it's got to be not the AI. It's got to be that you still got to have some professional judgment until you get to the point where you get to human level intelligence, and it can be. And even then, and we'll come to that story. What the Pope said: we never want to take away autonomy from human beings because we go down a very dangerous road then. But we're not near that at the moment. At least not. So it has to be with a professional, in my opinion. Don't know what you think, Nermeen.
Yeah, I was going to say it'd have to be sitting at the top of that, project director kind of triangle, and being able to kind of look at the information and say, well, does that make sense based on, other projects? Yeah. Yeah,
it's that gut feel as well. And that's why I still think we need a human in the loop. Whilst AI is a tool to us rather than an agent that is sitting alongside us, you're right. You need somebody who can override it. But I mean, it's probably a good time to go on to this other story from, there's a couple more I want to go through, but there was a warning came out from Pope Francis, actually, which kind of links nicely to the story, where he talked about the ethical risks of artificial intelligence. I think he spoke to the G7 summit.
Yeah, the
And
G7 summit.
and he talked about establishing, and we've talked about this quite a lot, haven't we, Yoshi, about make sure we've got guardrails and maintaining human control. But he takes a slightly different stance, obviously coming from a more spiritual side of things. He talks about human dignity. It's something we haven't really talked about. We've talked about it from the terms of security and actually making sure that someone is taking the blame or what have you. He comes at it from a human dignity point of view, saying that, if we start taking decision making away from humans, what's that doing to us as a species in terms of feeling like we've got control? So, and I think it's a very, very significant intervention and when the Pope starts talking about AI, we know that it's mainstream, right? But it is an important point, and it does relate to what we do as professionals, because for hundreds of years we've been making sure that projects are being delivered, I was going to say not always successfully, but to a conclusion. But it's always been a human being that's making those decisions, and what he's saying here is we still need to make sure we keep that human dignity. So I think my reading of it, he's saying we can use these tools, they're great, but don't ever let it get to the point that we're letting that take decisions away from humans. Is that your reading of it as well? Anyone?
I mean, I think, yeah. I was just going to say, I think it's around decision to support. I strongly kind of support that, because I don't think we're saying we think projects are going to run themselves. What we want is help so that we can be more effective at running them. And as we mentioned about this kind of why are projects late and why are they not delivered on time to budget. So some of this is around some of the biases in human behavior. Some of it's around not having access to the right information, but ultimately you do need the human to deliver the project.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, his intervention is common sense in a lot of ways, but common sense goes out the window when a few things happen, right? When money's involved, and we know there's this arms race happening at the moment, and people are throwing caution to the wind, and they're just going and developing and deploying stuff without thinking about it. So that's the first thing. And
but just there, James, I think this is a really important point, because when I asked you about why do we turn to government to help regulate a lot of AI developments, and I would say, it's because a lot of private companies will put money at the forefront. They want to develop at this arms race. And in this speech at the G7 summit, the Pope was calling on political leaders to take urgent action. So this is it's there for that very reason.
Right, but exactly. But I don't think we can rely on governments, keeping up to date with it, because with the best will in the world, it takes sometimes years for some of these policies to go through. And that's why I'll return back to, what the institutions are doing. I mean, I'm actually working at the moment with the RICS on an AI policy for its members. Those are the kind of tangible things we can do. And the stuff that we're doing, Nermeen, with the task force, it's very much about your circle of influence. What can you actually influence? And you can't worry. Well, you can worry about what's happening in the wider world with wars and AGI and et cetera, but if you can't have influence on it, then there's not a lot you can do. But what we can do, and what I would say to anyone listening to this, is do what you can do within your circle of influence to try and make sure people understand the risks and the opportunities of data analytics and AI. And it's as simple as that. That's all you can do.
And what I liked about this, about the Pope's kind of speech at the G7 summit, he referred to AI as a cognitive industrial revolution.
Yeah.
And I think I like that comment. But also, one thing that there is a bit of concern from me, though, is that there was the Seoul summit a few weeks back, and there's been a few summits, and there's been commitments and a willingness to regulate AI and make sure that it's human-centered, right? So that it supports what we do and is not going to cause a threat to humans. The leaders as a result of the G7 summit was this a code of conduct. It was called the Hiroshima AI process. Now, this is another documentation or a commitment from leaders across the world to regulate AI. At what point? There seems to be a lot of overlap. I don't know where the priorities are. So it just seems like there's a lot of commitment from kind of thought leaders mentioning a few things, but then when does it trickle down into action? And I think that's where a lot of the issues have been coming from public sector, in my opinion, is that sometimes there's a lot of conversation, but there's not a lot of commitment in some of these more extreme circumstances of which the Pope was referring to.
Yeah. And that's going back to our influence. That's why I welcome what's happened with the Project Data Analytics Coalition, which is, like we say, a spin-off from the task force, because that is about action. We do have a meetup with the day that this podcast is published on the Wednesday, where we're going to hear from two members of the coalition. That's Rolls-Royce and EDF Energy. And they're actually putting and the whole point of that is, yes, we've had enough guidance now. We've had enough papers written on this. The awareness is there. Now we've got to move on to action. And that's really important. And there's no easy way, Yoshi. You just got to be an advocate for this stuff and do what you can. And inevitably it takes a while to catch up. But we are definitely seeing progress. I think the awareness piece is there now. It's now the action piece.
It's better to do something than nothing.
Exactly, and there's an old saying, you do a lot more in a long period of time than you think you're able to, and a lot less than you think you can in a short period of time. And that is so true. How many times have you gone through a day and haven't done half as much as you planned to do? In fact, that was today for me. But how many times do you look back on a year and you look at what you've achieved in a year, right? So it's that same thing. We get very, very kind of het up about the path ahead of us and how much we've got yet to do. But, in a year's time, I think we would have seen significant progress. I think we've seen significant progress in the last year. We just got to keep it up. Just a couple of other stories I wanted to talk about before we close. There was a great blog that's on the newsletter from Built World, so an American company. They talk about what predictions are for technical advances within engineering and construction. So just a few of these. I'm just going to read them out, Nermeen, and let me know which ones you think are, kind of hit or miss, if you like. So he talks about, there's 10. One was conceptual design will become automated. I think ChatGPT for design. Then he goes on to say detailed design will start, once you get to conceptual design, detailed design will follow. Then detailed design's going directly to fabrication systems. So the whole kind of construction process becomes automated. And then I thought this one was really interesting. Identifying the best suppliers and pricing, that all becomes automated, a bit like Go Compare, I suppose. I won't go for all of them. I'll go for a couple more, leading to automated budget and schedule development. And then project management systems being able to update budgets and schedules basically in real time. Do you think these are real things that we're going to see over the course of the next 10 years, or do you think it's pie in the sky?
I definitely think automation of designs is, starting to happen.
That's already starting, isn't it?
I do think so. And you kind of look at the integrations at site and some of the kind of things to capture progress based on comparing images and that sort of thing. So, I do think in terms of some of that process, but the design to fabrication and tendering, I think there could be some resistance there. That might be what would block that, because that would kind of cut across supply chains, and is that creating monopolies? Like, how would you figure out who's going to fabricate what?
I think that sometimes people don't realize the complexities involved in construction. But the only thing I would say is, if you go back sort of to, I don't know how long it is now, 20 years ago, when you used to get your insurance, if things like Go Compare, that would have been a million miles off people's radar. And now we don't think twice about it. So a lot can change in a small period of time. It only takes one person to crack it, and then, it changes, it creates a new kind of normal.
Yeah, and also, we always hear about how we don't have enough project, or we see it actually, we don't have enough people to do a lot of our projects, and it's quite hard when you've got mega projects. Where you're going to find the people. So we do need some of these things to start being implemented on projects.
And I saw when I was at Digital Construction Week, in fact, we're going to have them on the podcast in a few weeks. There was a company that spun up called ADDD, which is basically a marketplace for different digital solutions. So that's a step in that direction, isn't it? Of creating some kind of app store, if you like, for digital solutions. I could see it happening for sure. And obviously this article was meant to be thought-provoking. Not all of it will happen, but I think a lot of it we'll see come to pass.
The biggest thing is going to be the upfront cost and scalability. The higher the upfront cost and the more stakeholders involved, organizations involved, I think that will be less likely to happen. And we did mention robots, right? Robots is on the list. That's probably going to be the last thing that's going to happen.
Well, big companies like Autodesk as well, I could see them spinning up some kind of solution like that. I mean, they're becoming so powerful in that space, and they've got, talking about data, so much data, they could easily create some kind of link with supply chains, etc., to create effectively, so you don't have to go out tendering, a kind of go compare for construction. But it remains to be seen, as I say. One more thing I wanted to cover before the end. There was a really good study by One Useful Thing, I think is the blog, which I hadn't come across before, and it's a bit of an older article, but it struck me because it talks about, I'll tell you why it struck me, because we had Andy Murray from the Major Projects Association on the podcast probably a month ago, and he talks about this, and there's a study that now kind of backs up what he says, that what AI is doing, it's raising everyone's level to be at least competent, at least average. So we're starting from this point where the skills level is being increased. And in fact, the article starts by saying, congratulations, you are now above average. And this happens on all fields, right? So, take music, for example, there's now AI that allows anyone to create some kind of song. So in a sense, that kind of skill level that you needed to become even remotely competent has gone down because of the use of AI. However, the jump from being merely competent or merely average to being amazing, I think still exists, right? And I think that will still exist for some time. Or do you think that's going to get eroded away as well? Any thoughts?
I think,
I'll
I do
go.
think, yeah, go on.
No, I like it. I like the idea that we become a lot more competent. I'll tell you why. Because if you then look at the differentiator between two different people, you're going to look at the part of what makes them human. And I think like your emotional intelligence, right? The ability to speak to people, empathize, I think these skills will come to the forefront. It's people will then have this knack for looking for human authenticity, which is what I think will be the differentiator between the winners, right? I don't know how you look at the people who are going to be.
It's the creativity. It will start, the people with real creativity and real creative direction.
It's the bit that we like about people. It's the bit that we resonate with people. It's that connection. It's who you have the connection with more, because we're going to be competent. So I see it as a good thing.
Is there an argument, devil's advocate, to say that by using these models, people aren't going to learn the foundations? If they can get to a position of average by using AI, then that means they've never learned those foundational skills to get to average. You've got to go through the pain of being rubbish at something, whether that's a designer or whether that's a musician or whether that. Are we shortcutting that?
I mean, maybe is it like but any revolution, if you go back to 1800s, we had to do a lot more basic things. We just, you evolve and your brains evolve, and it's, humans will evolve. So maybe what we need to be able to do will be slightly different. I used to kind of have a map before GPS, like map, like actually a physical map, and have to figure out where to get. But I prefer my phone now. I prefer to do it on the phone. I don't want to look at a map.
Yeah, exactly. But I think my point still stands, James, because everything before the AI. So the first principles part of learning something, right, that is also what makes you human. You learn as you go, and it impacts you as a person. So then when people are looking at you to differentiate between you and another person, they will understand all the pain points you went through. I think it's people's decisions of whether or not they want to use AI at that point. But maybe not using AI might also be seen as an advantage for some people, right? So
there will be a reaction to AI. That I'm sure of. There will be lots of this is being done without AI. But taking Nermeen's point, actually, do you need to learn map reading skills? Why would you? What is the benefit? Well, I guess the benefit is if we have some kind of nuclear holocaust and we're all don't have any electricity and we have to learn to read a map, that might be a reason that we need to learn it. But other than that, why would you need to learn? Why would you need to learn map reading skills when you could just use Google, right?
Yeah, and there's a funny story here. There was that, before we close up, there was a competition recently held, and it was an AI art competition, and someone was disqualified because they entered a submission which was done by hand, and they wanted to prove that it was better than what AI could generate. Now, it probably might have been, but they were disqualified and didn't learn anything. So the exclusion is the problem.
There's so many.
Yes.
Right, listen, guys, it's been a fascinating conversation. We've reached the end of our time. Nermeen, thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any sort of final words for the listeners?
No, thank you for inviting me. And just really, just everybody who is not, not feeling confident with AI, just have a read of the manifesto, figure out how you can apply it to your work, and reach out, come to some events, because we're all kind of growing together. So yeah.
Exactly. Nermeen's details can be found on the show notes, so you can connect with her on LinkedIn and the Project Data Analytics Task Force website. Yeah, absolutely. As you say, I think it's all about getting stuck in, because the longer you kind of leave it, the harder it's going to be to sort of get into it. And I know we're going to be preaching a lot to the choir with the listeners to this podcast, but I think what listeners to this podcast can do, Nermeen, is sort of spread the word and tell people not to be afraid, get stuck in. This is not something that we should be handing off to data specialists. It's something that we can take control of our own industry and our own destiny.
Absolutely.
But on that note, I will just say thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you again next week for another edition of Project Flux.
Thanks.
So we hope you guys enjoyed this conversation we had with Nermeen Latif from WSP. It was very insightful in terms of how we're seeing AI move within projects, but also at a larger scale. I mean, we're starting to see figures such as the Pope and also AI candidates within UK Parliament. So it's taking centre stage at the moment. If you guys did enjoy this podcast today, please don't forget to like, comment, and also give us a rating so other like-minded people can also see. And yeah, all of our podcasts are formed upon the newsletter we send out. So if you can subscribe to that too, you'll get all the information a day earlier, and you'll get all the information when it's ready off the press.
Brilliant. Great. And we'll see you next time.